The complete family tree of dragons. What if every dragon you've ever heard of, from Smaug and the Chinese Long to the Hydra and even Quetzalcoatl, was actually part of one enormous family tree stretching back over 5,000 years? At first glance, that sounds impossible. After all, dragons from Europe breathe fire. Chinese dragons control rivers and rain. Norse dragons guard treasure beneath mountains, while feathered serpents soar through the skies of ancient Mexico. They look different, they behave differently. Some are monsters, others are gods. Yet when historians, archaeologists, and mythologists compare these creatures side by side, a surprising pattern begins to emerge. Many of them share the same ancestors. Across continents separated by thousands of miles, civilizations that never met each other told stories about enormous serpentine beings connected to chaos, water, storms, mountains, wisdom, creation, and the boundary between the human world and the divine. The similarities are so striking that scholars still debate whether dragons spread through cultural contact or whether humanity has always imagined them in remarkably similar ways. So where did the dragon family actually begin? To answer that question, we have to travel further back than medieval Europe, further back than ancient Greece, further back than Egypt itself. The oldest ancestor of nearly every dragon in history was not a dragon at all. It was a giant cosmic serpent. Long before castles, knights, or emperors, people living in Mesopotamia believed the universe began in endless waters. Before the sky existed, before the earth had formed, only chaos remained. And chaos had a body. Its name was Tiamat. Unlike later dragons, Tiamat was far more than a monster. She represented the primal ocean itself, the limitless force from which everything emerged. Ancient Babylonian texts describe her as an enormous serpent or sea dragon, whose body contained the power to create both life and destruction. But as younger gods rose to power, a great war broke out. The storm god Marduk challenged Tiamat in one of the oldest recorded battles in human history. According to the Enuma Elish, Marduk defeated the great serpent, split her body in half, and used one part to form the heavens while the other became the earth. This idea, that order is born only after a hero defeats a gigantic serpent, would become one of mythology's most enduring stories, and it would spread far beyond Mesopotamia. Thousands of years later, remarkably similar battles appear across the ancient world. In Egypt, the sun god Ra fights the monstrous serpent Apep every single night as he journeys through the underworld. In Canaanite mythology, the storm god Baal defeats the twisting sea serpent Lotan. In ancient India, the god Indra battles the dragon Vritra to release the rivers imprisoned inside its body. Centuries later, Zeus would overthrow Typhon. Thor would battle Jormungandr. Saint George would slay the dragon. The names changed, the cultures changed, but the story remained astonishingly familiar. One powerful deity, one enormous serpent, one battle that decides the fate of the world. This recurring pattern has fascinated scholars for generations. Some believe these myths all descended from a common Near Eastern tradition carried by merchants, migrants, and storytellers over thousands of years. Others argue something even more intriguing. Perhaps human beings everywhere instinctively imagined chaos as an enormous snake. After all, snakes were among humanity's oldest predators. They moved silently, appeared without warning, shed their skin as if reborn, and often lived near rivers, caves, or deep underground. It's not difficult to understand how early civilizations transformed those terrifying animals into gigantic, supernatural beings. But the dragon family didn't stop evolving. As myths traveled between kingdoms, every civilization reshaped the ancient serpent into something entirely new. Some dragons grew wings, others gained legs. Some learned to breathe fire. Others became immortal guardians of rivers, mountains, treasure, or even entire kingdoms. Within a few thousand years, the original cosmic serpent had split into dozens of different bloodlines. And that's where the dragon family tree truly begins. The first branches of the dragon family. As the first civilizations rose along the great rivers of the ancient world, the descendants of the cosmic serpent began began evolving into entirely different creatures. The original dragon was no longer just chaos itself. Now, every culture gave the ancient serpent a new identity. Some became monsters, some became guardians, others became gods. The first major branch appeared in ancient Egypt. Unlike the Babylonian Tiamat, Egypt's greatest serpent was never defeated forever. Every single night, as the sun disappeared beyond the western horizon, the god Ra was believed to sail through the underworld aboard his solar bark. Waiting in the darkness was Apep, also called Apophis, a gigantic serpent so enormous that ancient texts describe him wrapping around entire mountains. Unlike later dragons that hoarded treasure or terrorized villages, Apep represented something far more terrifying. He was absolute disorder, darkness, the end of creation itself. Every sunrise, according to Egyptian belief, only happened because Ra defeated Apep once again. In other words, the universe survived one more day because the dragon had been beaten. But here's where things become interesting. Apep was never killed. Unlike many later dragons, he returned every single night. This idea that chaos can never truly disappear would become one of mythology's oldest recurring themes. But Egypt wasn't the only civilization transforming the ancient serpent. To the northeast, among the Canaanites, another branch of the dragon family was taking shape. His name was Lotan. Described as a twisting, seven-headed sea serpent, Lotan served the chaotic forces of the ocean and opposed the storm god Baal. If that description sounds familiar, it should, because centuries later, the Hebrew Bible would mention a terrifying creature named Leviathan. Like Lotan, Leviathan was a massive sea serpent. Like Lotan, it symbolized untamable chaos. And like Lotan, it would eventually become one of history's most recognizable dragons. Many historians believe Leviathan evolved directly from the older Canaanite tradition. The names changed, the religion changed, but the dragon survived. In fact, the image of the enormous sea serpent became so influential that echoes of it appear throughout Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. By now, the dragon family had already begun splitting into multiple bloodlines. One line became cosmic serpents, another became sea monsters. But farther east, a completely different evolution was unfolding. In ancient India, dragons became something humanity had rarely imagined before. They became guardians. Indian mythology introduced creatures known as Nagas. Unlike the destructive monsters of Mesopotamia, Nagas were intelligent serpent beings who lived beneath rivers, lakes, and underground palaces filled with unimaginable wealth. Some appeared as giant cobras, others possessed human upper bodies and serpent tails. Many wore jeweled crowns and ruled hidden kingdoms beneath the earth. Instead of representing only chaos, Nagas embodied fertility, wisdom, immortality, and sacred knowledge. Yet they remained dangerous. If respected, they brought rain, prosperity, and protection. If angered, they unleashed floods, droughts, or deadly venom. For the first time, dragons had become morally complex. They weren't simply good. They weren't simply evil. They reflected nature itself, capable of nurturing life or destroying it without warning. This transformation would prove incredibly important, because thousands of years later, another civilization would inherit many of these ideas, China. But before we travel east, another remarkable branch of the dragon family deserves attention. Ancient Persia introduced one of mythology's most fearsome dragon bloodlines. These creatures were known as Azzi-Dahaka. Originally described in the sacred texts of the Avesta, Azzi-Dahaka was not merely a serpent. He became a horrifying, dragon-like monster with multiple heads, immense strength, and an insatiable hunger for human flesh. According to Persian legend, evil itself corrupted him. His shoulders sprouted venomous snakes that demanded human brains as food. This terrifying image would later inspire countless stories involving dragons associated with tyranny, curses, and demonic power. Notice how dramatically dragons were changing. In Babylon, the dragon was creation itself. In Egypt, the dragon became eternal chaos. In Canaan, it ruled the sea. In India, it guarded sacred rivers and hidden wisdom. In Persia, it transformed into a symbol of corruption and absolute evil. The family tree was expanding at an astonishing speed. Yet despite all these differences, nearly every dragon still shared the same ancient ancestry. They remained enormous, serpentine beings connected to supernatural forces beyond human control. Whether they guarded rivers, controlled storms, protected treasure, or threatened the entire universe, every branch could still be traced back to humanity's oldest fear, the giant serpent born from chaos itself. But the next transformation would change dragons forever, because somewhere in East Asia, the serpent would finally leave the earth. It would rise into the sky. It would command the wind, summon rain, rule the seasons, and become one of the most respected creatures ever imagined. This was the birth of the Eastern dragon, and perhaps the most extraordinary branch of the entire dragon family tree. The sky dragons of the East. If the dragons of the ancient Middle East were born from chaos, the dragons of East Asia were born from harmony. This was one of the most dramatic transformations in the entire dragon family tree. Somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, early Chinese cultures began combining several powerful animals into a single mythical creature. It had the antlers of a deer, the claws of an eagle, the scales of a fish, the body of a serpent, the whiskers of a catfish, and the face of a camel. The result was unlike anything the world had seen before. The Long, the Chinese dragon. Unlike European dragons, the Long almost never breathed fire. It didn't destroy kingdoms. It didn't sleep on mountains of gold. Instead, it ruled the sky itself. To ancient China, dragons controlled rain, rivers, clouds, floods, harvests, and the changing of the seasons. Farmers prayed to them for rain during droughts, while emperors claimed to rule under their divine protection. In fact, the Chinese emperor became so closely associated with dragons that only he was permitted to wear robes decorated with the famous five-clawed imperial dragon. To wear that symbol without permission could be considered an act of treason. The dragon had evolved from a monster into the symbol of an entire civilization. But where did this extraordinary creature come from? Some historians believe the Chinese dragon developed independently from local serpent worship. Others point to ancient trade routes stretching across Central Asia, where stories from Mesopotamia, Persia, and India slowly mixed with Chinese traditions over thousands of years. Whatever its origin, one thing is clear. The Chinese dragon became the ancestor of an entirely new branch of the family tree. Soon, neighboring cultures began creating dragons of their own. In Japan, the dragon became known as Vyu. At first glance, Yu looks almost identical to the Chinese Long. Long body, flowing whiskers, power over water. But Japanese mythology gave dragons a very different personality. Some became protectors of sacred shrines. Others ruled deep lakes or volcanic islands. And some were terrifying monsters capable of destroying entire provinces. Perhaps the most famous was Yamata no Orochi. Unlike the elegant Chinese dragon, Orochi possessed 8 heads and 8 tails. Its body stretched across valleys. Trees grew upon its back. Its eyes glowed red like winter cherries. Every year, the monster demanded another human sacrifice, until the storm god Susanoo devised an unusual plan. Instead of fighting the dragon directly, he offered it enormous barrels of strong sake. The beast drank until every one of its heads collapsed into drunken sleep. Only then did Susanoo strike. As he cut through Orochi's tail, his sword struck something unexpected. Hidden inside the dragon's body was a divine blade, the legendary Kusanagi sword, one of Japan's 3 imperial regalia. Suddenly, the dragon wasn't merely an enemy. It had become the guardian of sacred power. This was another remarkable evolution. In many cultures, dragons didn't simply guard treasure, they became the source of it. The farther we travel across East Asia, the more these dragons resemble members of the same family. Korea introduced Yong. Vietnam honored the Rong. Although each possessed unique legends, they all shared familiar characteristics: long serpentine bodies, control over rain and rivers, association with kings and emperors, wisdom instead of brutality. Unlike their European cousins, these dragons rarely represented evil. Instead, they symbolized balance between heaven and earth. They connected the human world with the divine. In many stories, dragons could even transform into human form, marrying mortals or founding royal bloodlines. Across East Asia, dragons became ancestors instead of enemies. But the family tree contained an even older connection. Remember the Nagas from India? The intelligent serpent guardians who lived beneath rivers and lakes? Many scholars believe they helped shape how dragons evolved throughout Asia. Like Nagas, Chinese dragons controlled water. Like Nagas, they possessed immense wisdom. Like Nagas, they connected the earthly world with hidden spiritual realms. Although direct evidence remains debated, the similarities are difficult to ignore. Ideas moved alongside merchants, stories traveled with monks, religions crossed mountains, and every civilization reshaped the dragon into something familiar. This constant evolution explains why Asian dragons appear so different from European dragons, despite sharing surprisingly ancient roots. One branch embraced harmony, the other embraced conflict. One ruled storms, the other guarded treasure. One symbolized imperial authority, the other became the ultimate beast for heroes to conquer. Yet both descended from humanity's oldest image, the Great Serpent. And while dragons were becoming symbols of wisdom across Asia, something very different was happening in Europe. There, dragons were growing legs, growing wings, learning to breathe fire, and becoming the most feared monsters in Western mythology. The next branch of the dragon family would give us creatures like the Hydra, Ladon, Fafnir, the Wyvern, and eventually nearly every dragon that appears in modern fantasy today. The fire dragons of Europe. While dragons in the East were becoming symbols of wisdom, prosperity, and divine authority, their distant relatives in Europe were evolving into something far more terrifying. This branch of the dragon family abandoned rivers and clouds. Instead, it descended into caves, dark forests, volcanic mountains, and forgotten ruins. Here, dragons no longer protected humanity, they challenged it. To understand why, we need to travel to ancient Greece, the birthplace of some of history's most famous dragons. But the Greeks didn't actually use the word dragon the way we do today. They called these creatures drakon, meaning the one who sees clearly, or the watchful one. The name referred not to wings or fire, but to giant serpents with an almost supernatural ability to guard what was sacred. One of the oldest was Python. According to legend, Python lived beneath the sanctuary of Delphi long before Apollo claimed it as his own. The serpent guarded an ancient spring believed to possess prophetic power. When Apollo arrived, he fought and killed Python, claiming the sacred site for himself. It was more than a battle. It symbolized a new generation of gods replacing older, more mysterious forces of nature. Once again, a young deity defeated an ancient serpent. The pattern had survived for thousands of years. Another famous guardian was Ladon. Unlike Python, Ladon never left his post. His task was to protect the golden apples growing within the Garden of the Hesperides. Some ancient writers described him with 100 heads. Others simply called him an immortal serpent whose countless eyes never closed. Imagine trying to steal a treasure from a creature that literally never slept. Only Heracles, during one of his legendary 12 labors, succeeded in overcoming Ladon. Even then, some versions claim the dragon was so honored by the gods that Zeus placed him among the stars as the constellation Draco. The dragon had become immortal. But perhaps no Greek creature influenced later dragons more than the Hydra. At first glance, the Hydra seems almost unrelated. It lived in a swamp rather than a mountain. It had many heads instead of one, and it possessed no wings. Yet its abilities changed the future of dragon mythology forever. Every time one of its heads was cut off, two more grew in its place. This regenerative power transformed the Hydra into something nearly impossible to defeat. Heracles eventually discovered that brute strength alone wasn't enough. After severing each head, he cauterized the neck with fire before another could grow. The lesson was clear. Victory required intelligence, not just strength. Centuries later, countless fantasy dragons would inherit this same idea. They became creatures that heroes couldn't simply overpower. They had to outthink them. By now, dragons across Europe had developed a common identity. They guarded sacred places, protected magical treasures, blocked heroes from completing impossible quests, and represented the ultimate obstacle between mortals and glory. But farther north, the dragon family evolved once again, this time in the frozen landscapes of Scandinavia. Norse mythology introduced creatures unlike anything seen before. Among them was Nidhugr, a monstrous dragon that lived beneath Yggdrasil, the world tree connecting all 9 realms. While the eagle perched at the top of the tree symbolized the heavens, Nidhugr endlessly gnawed at its roots below. He wasn't trying to conquer the world. He was slowly destroying its foundations. This image reflected a uniquely Norse view of existence. The universe wasn't permanent. Everything, even the cosmos itself, was slowly wearing away. And deep below, the dragon never stopped chewing. Yet another Norse dragon would become even more influential, not because he was born a monster, but because he became one. His name was Fafnir. Originally, Fafnir was a dwarf. Greed transformed him. After murdering his own father for a cursed treasure, he withdrew into the wilderness. Over time, his obsession twisted both his mind and body. Eventually, he became a dragon. This was a revolutionary idea. The dragon wasn't simply an animal. It was the physical form of human corruption. The more treasure Fafnir accumulated, the less human he became. His story deeply influenced medieval Europe, where dragons increasingly came to represent greed, pride, and moral decay. Centuries later, this same concept inspired one of literature's most famous dragons. J.R.R. Tolkien openly acknowledged Norse mythology as one of his greatest inspirations. His dragon Smaug is, in many ways, a direct descendant of Fafnir. An impossibly wealthy creature lying atop a mountain of stolen gold. Intelligent, proud, manipulative, and consumed by endless greed. But another transformation was already taking place. Somewhere during the Middle Ages, European artists began changing the dragon's appearance. Ancient serpents gradually gained powerful legs, huge leathery wings, massive horns, and the terrifying ability to breathe fire. Why? No one knows for certain. Some historians believe dragons absorbed features from lions, bats, crocodiles, birds of prey, and even fossil discoveries that people couldn't explain. Others think medieval imagination simply made them more terrifying with every generation. Whatever the reason, the classic Western dragon was finally born, towering over castles, darkening the sky, scattering armies, and breathing flames across entire kingdoms. This became the dragon that dominated European folklore, the dragon slain by St. George, the dragon guarding forgotten treasure, the dragon waiting at the end of every hero's journey. But Europe's dragons were only one side of the story, because across the Atlantic, entire civilizations had developed dragon-like beings without ever meeting Europe or Asia. And some of those creatures would become among the most fascinating branches of the entire dragon family tree. The feathered dragons of the Americas. By the time dragons had spread across Europe and Asia, you might assume the family tree was complete. After all, every major civilization seemed to have its own version. But then, archaeologists uncovered something extraordinary. Across the Atlantic, in civilizations that had developed continually independently from Europe and Asia, people were also worshipping enormous, serpent-like beings with divine powers. They weren't called dragons, yet they shared far more similarities than anyone expected. The most famous of them all was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. To the Aztecs, Quetzalcoatl was not a monster to be slain. He was one of the greatest gods in existence. His name combined two symbols of opposite worlds: Quetzal, the brilliantly colored bird that ruled the skies, and Coatl, the serpent that moved across the earth. Together, they represented the union of heaven and earth. Unlike European dragons, Quetzalcoatl brought civilization rather than destruction. Ancient traditions credit him with teaching humanity agriculture, astronomy, writing, mathematics, craftsmanship, and even moral law. He was associated with knowledge instead of chaos, creation instead of conquest. His temples dominated cities like Teotihuacan and Chichen Itza, where massive stone serpent heads still emerge from the pyramids today. During the equinox, sunlight creates an astonishing illusion. Shadows appear to form the body of a gigantic serpent descending the staircase. For thousands of spectators, it is as if the feathered serpent himself returns to Earth. But Quetzalcoatl wasn't alone. Long before the Aztecs rose to power, the Maya worshipped a remarkably similar deity. His name was Kukulkan. Like Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan combined the body of a serpent with magnificent feathers. Like Quetzalcoatl, he ruled the skies, brought wisdom, and shaped civilization. Many historians believe they were different cultural versions of the same divine being. Just as Zeus became Jupiter in Rome, Quetzalcoatl became Kukulkan among the Maya, another branch of the same mythological family. Farther south, other civilizations developed their own serpent gods. The Inca honored Amaru, a gigantic two-headed serpent capable of moving between the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. Unlike dragons that simply guarded treasure, Amaru connected entire worlds. He symbolized transformation itself. His body united creatures from different realms, part serpent, part bird, and sometimes even part puma. Once again, the dragon family had evolved, not into a monster, but into a bridge between dimensions. The deeper researchers look into ancient American mythology, the more fascinating the pattern becomes. Across continents separated by vast oceans, humanity repeatedly imagined enormous serpents connected to water, rain, storms, creation, wisdom, and divine authority. Could this really be a coincidence? Or does the human imagination naturally create dragons? Some psychologists believe the answer lies deep inside our evolution. Humans developed alongside snakes for millions of years. Even today, our brains detect snake-like shapes faster than almost any other animal. Evolution taught our ancestors to recognize serpents instantly. Now imagine early humans watching lightning split the sky, floods swallow entire villages, volcanoes erupt without warning, or giant rivers twisting across the landscape like living creatures. It's easy to see how those forces became one enormous supernatural serpent. Every civilization simply gave that serpent a different name. But there's another possibility. Stories travel. Trade routes connected civilizations long before modern historians once believed. Ideas crossed deserts, sailed across seas, moved from one generation to the next through merchants, explorers, priests, and migrants. Perhaps dragons evolved not from one single culture, but from thousands of years of storytelling. Every civilization inherited an older legend, added something new, and passed it onward. The dragon family tree wasn't growing through biology, it was evolving through imagination. By now, the family had become astonishingly diverse. Cosmic dragons, sea dragons, river dragons, sky dragons, treasure dragons, guardian dragons, feathered dragons, fire dragons, winged dragons, serpent dragons. Each looked different. Each served a different purpose. Yet all could still trace their ancestry back to one ancient idea, the great serpent standing between humanity and the unknown. But one final branch still remains, because after thousands of years of mythology, dragons refused to disappear. Instead, they entered modern fantasy and became more popular than ever before. The last branch of the dragon family. By the end of the Middle Ages, dragons had become one of humanity's most recognizable mythical creatures. But something remarkable happened next. Instead of disappearing as people stopped believing in mythology, dragons evolved once again. Only this time, they left religion behind and entered fiction. The old myths never truly died. They simply found new homes. The dragons of ancient Babylon became fantasy world builders. The wise dragons of China became symbols of balance and spiritual power. The treasure-hoarding beasts of Northern Europe inspired countless novels, films, and games. And before long, nearly every modern dragon could trace its ancestry back to one, or often several, of these ancient bloodlines. One of the greatest turning points came in the 20th century. An Oxford professor named J.R.R. Tolkien wasn't interested in inventing completely new monsters. Instead, he carefully studied Norse sagas, Anglo-Saxon poetry, medieval legends, and ancient mythology. When he created Smaug in The Hobbit, he wasn't creating a dragon from scratch. He was bringing an ancient family member back to life. Smaug inherited Fafnir's greed. He possessed the intelligence of the oldest mythological dragons. Like Ladon, he guarded an unimaginable treasure. Like the Hydra, he could not be defeated through brute force alone. Every conversation with Smaug became a battle of wit before it ever became a battle of weapons. Through Tolkien, millions of readers unknowingly met one of mythology's oldest descendants. Then came another transformation. In the late 20th century, dragons stopped being villains altogether. Stories began asking a different question. What if humans had misunderstood dragons all along? Books such as Dragon Riders of Tern, Aragon, and later How to Train Your Dragon introduced dragons as companions rather than monsters. Instead of breathing destruction, they formed friendships. Instead of guarding treasure, they protected entire worlds. Even television transformed them. In Game of Thrones, dragons once again became symbols of kingship and absolute power, echoing the role they had played in Imperial China thousands of years earlier. Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion were terrifying. Yet they weren't evil. Like the oldest dragons, they reflected the nature of those who sought to control them. The family tree had come full circle. Modern fantasy didn't choose one ancient dragon tradition, it combined them all. A single fictional dragon might have the wisdom of the Long, the power of Tiamat, the greed of Fafnir, the wings of medieval Europe, the intelligence of Quetzalcoatl, and the cosmic significance of Apep or Leviathan. Every generation continued adding new branches to the tree, but perhaps the most fascinating question remains unanswered. Why are dragons everywhere? Why did civilizations separated by oceans imagine creatures that share so many remarkable similarities? No one knows for certain. Some scholars argue dragons spread through migration and trade. Ancient merchants carried stories along the Silk Road. Empires conquered neighboring kingdoms. Religions absorbed older myths. Each generation retold the same legends with new names and new details. Others believe dragons emerged independently. Nearly every early civilization feared snakes. Nearly every civilization depended on rivers. Nearly every civilization witnessed storms, floods, eclipses, volcanoes, and earthquakes they couldn't explain. Perhaps the dragon became the perfect symbol of nature itself, beautiful, powerful, unpredictable, capable of giving life, or taking it away without warning. In that sense, dragons may tell us less about monsters and more about ourselves. They reveal what each civilization feared most, what each culture admired, what every generation hoped to conquer, and what humanity has always struggled to understand. When we follow the dragon family tree from Mesopotamia to Egypt, from India to China, from Greece to Scandinavia, from Mesoamerica to modern fantasy, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. The dragon never truly belonged to one culture. It belonged to all of them. Every civilization adopted the ancient serpent. Every generation reshaped it. Every storyteller added another branch. And that may be the greatest mystery of all. Perhaps dragons never existed in the physical world, yet few creatures have lived longer in the human imagination. For over 5,000 years, kingdoms have risen and fallen, languages have disappeared, religions have changed, empires have crumbled into dust. But dragons endured. They survived because they evolved alongside us. Every age created the dragon it needed, the guardian, the destroyer, the teacher, the tyrant, the god, the monster, the friend. The final chapter of the dragon family tree has never actually been written, because every new story, every new legend, every new generation adds another branch. And somewhere in the future, humanity will imagine dragons once again. Only they'll look a little different, just as they always have. If you enjoyed exploring the complete family tree of dragons, don't forget to subscribe. There are thousands of forgotten creatures, ancient gods, and legendary monsters whose stories are all connected in ways most people never realize. And in our next journey, we'll uncover another hidden branch of mythology that has been evolving for thousands of years. Until then, thanks for watching.